Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. If you're able to turn your cameras on, it would be wonderful to see you. But if you can't, we understand. So I want to welcome you all to the second session of the Reimagine series, The Pursuit of Justice from Inequity to Integrity. My name is Andrew Engel, and I lead virtual public programs at Reimagine. I live in New York City, which is located in Lenapehoking, which is the indigenous name of the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape peoples. During the colonial era and the early federal period, many Native folks were removed west and north, and some remained among the continuing historical tribal communities in this region. I acknowledge the indigenous territory where I am to remind myself that more steps are needed to undo generations of damage caused by colonialism and white supremacy. My hope is that this series and other Reimagine programs are incrementally moving us in the right direction. So please let everyone know where you're zooming in from in the chat. We'd love to see that. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white cisgender male. For those who don't have a visual of me, I've got glasses, salt and pepper hair, a plaid shirt, and a bright orange wall behind me. Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, ages, races, and faiths, people of no faith, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other in facing adversity, loss, and mortality, and to transform life's biggest challenges into meaningful action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free and sliding scale, and we want to make these accessible to the public. It's made possible by support and generosity of participants like you. So for those who already made a tax-deductible donation to Reimagine when you registered, thank you. Let's see. We've been exploring topics, looking at different aspects of loss, grief, and struggle through the lens of post-traumatic growth. Previous series have focused on aging, money, career, climate change, and addiction. This is the second session of a three-part series focused on the grief and growth associated with the pursuit of justice. I thought it would be helpful to share at least one definition of justice that our colleague Mazen Jamal of Holistic Underground has offered to us. And I'm going to paste this later in the chat, but he has suggested that justice is, quote, a state of integrity and wholeness achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in a community or society, end of quote. And I'm curious, after I paste this in the chat, if any of you have any responses to this, if there are elements of this definition that resonate with you. Last week in this series, which kicked it off, we heard a story about friendship between two women, Chaplain Betty Clark and Dr. Jessica Zitter. Betty is a chaplain and a Black woman who serves her community at Highland, a public hospital in Oakland. Dr. Jessica Zitter is a white physician working in critical and palliative care, also employed at Highland. And Chaplain Clark's main message is that all of us need a voice in how we receive care. We need to speak up when witnessing or experiencing injustice. Dr. Zitter explained that she wasn't looking for a mentor initially, but she found one in Chaplain Betty. And Betty quickly taught her to see what she sees every day. Dr. Zitter recognized her own implicit biases in her practice, and Betty has them too. Betty taught Jessica that when someone is admitted into the hospital, you never know their full story. And of course, this principle goes beyond a hospital setting, on the street, in your workplaces, everywhere. And I'll try to summarize this, but Betty shared a very painful story about a young boy who was playing basketball in a park. He could no longer, he was shot while playing basketball, and he could no longer walk after that. He was in a wheelchair. A few years later, when he was 14, he was waiting for a bus with a group of kids. They were going to a birthday party. The police came, dragged him out of his chair, injured him, and took him to jail, not charged with any crime. It's not an unfamiliar story in this country. But because of his injuries, he went back to Highland Hospital. Betty sat with him, took time to listen. He never got his wheelchair back. So Betty learned that on the same day he was shot, his grandfather had died. They had a long conversation. And Betty went to the woman in charge of equipment and asked for a wheelchair. The woman responded by saying, he's not getting another wheelchair. We already gave him one. He's not getting another one. And Betty asked, do you know his story? She said, no, Betty, what's his story? And so Betty told her. And by the time she finished, Betty's colleague said, he's getting a wheelchair. So when I heard this story of injustice, and it was painful for me to hear it, I was listening, but I don't think I was fully processing it. My brain was doing most of the work, but I'm not sure about my body. So this is why I'm eager to learn from Malkia Devich Cyril tonight. I know we'll get some insights in how we embody grief and how we can grow from grief. And now, just a few Zoom tips for you before we begin. For those who wish, you can click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said, and you can save the chat by clicking on the 3 dots in the chat box. Feel free to send me a note if you're having any technical issues. I might be able to help you. And we are recording this program. So anyone who has registered, you will get a recording as a follow-up in the email. Okay. And now it's my honor, finally, to introduce Malkia Devich Cyril. Malkia is a transformative grief worker and a movement strategist, as well as a writer, public speaker, and award-winning activist on issues of collective grief, Black liberation, and narrative power. As the founding and former director of the Youth Media Council and Media Justice, Malkia spearheaded national grassroots efforts for access in a digital age and galvanized communities of color for an open internet and media accountability. After 2 decades of media justice leadership and in an era of devastating mass loss, Malkia is currently incubating their Radical Loss project at Mia Birdsong's Culture Change Lab and writing a book on the radical possibilities of Black grief. Now, Malkia, before we begin, I want to thank you, and I want to pause and dedicate this workshop to the memory of your wife, Alana Devich Cyril, and your mother, Janet. And my wish to you is that you are surrounded by love and support in the years to come. Can you share a bit about these people in your life with us?
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be with you all tonight. And in particular, it's an honor to be with you because, in the last 4 days, my cousin has died, my friend has died, and my aunt has died. And I share that with you because all of these were freedom fighters. All of these were people who worked for transformative social change. And my mom was no different. My mother's name is Janet Cyril. She was a member of the Black Panther Party, a founding member in the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party. She raised two activists. I was raised inside of Black radical communities. And you know, of course, my wife, who I'd like to share a bit about her, and I'm gonna actually share more about her in her own words in a moment, if that's okay. But one of the things that I think is important and why I'm so happy to be here with you as a Panther Cub, as my mother's child, is because you know, my wife, who was a writer, an editor, a comedian. She was very funny. She also she was diagnosed with terminal cancer 1 year after we got married, and she died 2 years later. And so she was someone that I knew in college in the '90s. You know, we fell in love in much later, and we got married super quick, and she died very soon after that. So I am so lucky to have been loved by so many incredible women. My mother, my wife, and all of the other feminists and freedom fighters that have come before. So I'm grateful today. I'm grateful today, and I'm glad to be with you, and I'm glad to introduce her to you all. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen, and she could speak to you herself as we begin this conversation. Here we go. And today we're going to spend some time together. We're going to spend some time learning a little bit about the role that grief plays in the context of inequality and unequal power relations. I know some of you are activists and organizers, and some of you are just people very deeply concerned with the way things are right now, and many of you are suffering, you know, suffering as a result of all that we're seeing and experiencing. So let's begin with a personal story, yeah, and she can tell you all about who she is. Let's see here, but I got to do this part first. Let's see. All right. Can you see my screen? Yeah, you can? All right, awesome. Actually, I might need to, I think I didn't share it properly. Let's do it again. Share it. Yeah, we did. We got it. And let's go.
I'm 42 years old. I'm queer. I'm really good at amusing myself.
I'm half black and half white, which means I'm black.
I'm married. I love being married. I'm very good at it. I'm an only child, a word nerd, a lover of ice cream and delicious drinks. In fact, I've always been a lover of eating. I think it would be fair to describe me as a bon vivant. In November 2016, the United States voted in Donald Trump as president, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic gastroesophageal cancer. I've always struggled with finding my purpose in life, but really, how do I figure it out now, when the world is going to hell and I can barely keep up with my chemo schedule?
We are all in the fight of our lives right now, and if I can fight stage 4 cancer, we can all fight Trump and win.
Oh, and don't worry, I'll still be alive at the end of this film. It's not that kind of story. Once I felt good enough, the existential crisis reared its head. And it really was about, what do I organize my days around now? Is this really what I do now? I wake up at 11 a.m. and I go for a walk. That's my life now. I mean, what's the meaning in that? Everything about this diagnosis was a huge shock to me and to everyone I knew.
Lana and I met each other at a technology company where we used to work together for a number of years.
I mean, I worked for her.
I mean, we worked on the same team.
She ran the team.
Sometimes it makes me sad, but that's only at times when I feel my aches and pains. I go, she's not going to go through these aches and pains because she's going through different kind of pain now. But yeah, other than that, I think it's just a journey. We all have a journey. This is her journey, trying to share it with her the best I can.
One of the things that I thought about when I heard that Muffy had the cancer was that she's going to have a lot of support from friends, from her spouse, and definitely from her parents and relatives and everything. But the thing that concerned me maybe the most was that this is something a person goes through, you're all alone. And I just hate to think of my daughter being all alone and nothing that I can do that was going to make her not be all alone.
I remember coming home and thinking I'd never faced this before at work, because there's this awful moment when you realize that here's someone that you cared deeply about, and you're like, okay, well, I have this track, I want to help them, and so whatever we can do to help. And then I had to come back to work the next week and ask these folks who were very devastated to start working.
She's like one of the most healthiest, like clean eating, good habits, oral hygiene is great, really conscious of her body. And then, but yet is this devastating cancer. Cancer
is not kind. It's changed everything in my life. I get chemo 3 days out of every 14. I have medical appointments almost every other day. I'm a patient now. And I'm always tired. I could fall asleep right now. There's a real part of this journey that I have to take alone. But the reality is I am so supported. My community has shown up in ways I never would have imagined.
Bitch, you better work it. You better bend on over and twerk it. You better act like you know how to eat now. You're gonna put this song on repeat now.
Whether it's daily meditations, sending food, financial support, helping me pick out wigs, just showing up all the time, it's been mind-blowing.
On your side, you got the whole world. On your side, you got the whole...
I feel so lucky. It's really encouraged me to share more of myself with the world.
We love you, we do.
Robin, can I record the support group today?
I have to say no, primarily because of the confidentiality factor.
We have discussed confidentiality in group. It's not a good idea.
And that's a bummer. But you know what? We'll figure it out. Don't worry about it, bro.
Cancer. 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 Cancer.
Cancer, cancer, cancer. Cancer, 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 cancer.
For real?
Huh?
For real? For real?
It's for the documentary.
Okay, nah. There has to be a better way. Really?
Yeah.
For real?
For real.
I'm Mitch. She's Muffy. I just want to be clear about that. And we're here to play for you the classic standard Three Blind Mice. Nah, this is a serious song.
My main support all day, every day is my partner, my studspend, Mac. Some of that is abstract, like Mac just makes everything better. We stay having fun.
See how they run? Doctor, I want to know this. What's going on with my baby's chest? She's got a toe infection. What up, selector? What's the medication to deal with this mess? Plus the poop. Yo, let's talk about that. The poop is kind of soft, but thank God it ain't black. Black is beautiful, but not as doodleable. We need a solution. Diarrhea is whack. Plus the CT and the echo is back. Waiting got us nervous, but we ready for that. So hit us with the results of that test. But I'm going to need some good news because my baby's the best. Booyaka, booyaka, booyaka.
But also, I literally would not be alive today if I didn't have Mac advocating for me. I probably wouldn't be able to walk if Mac didn't push to get me back home for my brain surgery. Did I mention I've had brain surgery? I mean, why just go to Hawaii to have a good time if you can have a hemorrhaging brain tumor that makes it so you can't move your left side and requires you to get medevaced across the Pacific Ocean? I'm just saying. Living with cancer isn't all bad. It's reminded me of a core belief of mine. One of the reasons we are on Earth, in these humanly bodies, is to experience pleasure. I think pleasure is a practice, one you have to fight for. You can fall out of practice, or you can practice pleasure like your life depends on it. In my case, it really does. Whenever I think about what am I specifically good at, like what do I bring? I always think what I bring is delight and enjoyment. I mean, I can enjoy the shit out of some things. Like, I don't think everybody does. So that's kind of what I feel my life philosophy is. I'm here to appreciate the world and what's going on around me. And if I don't then try to complicate things, then I feel pretty content with that.
So thanks for participating with that. The reason I wanted to start with her and with her story is because Alana is someone who embodies in every way what it means to be able to transform grief into gratitude, into grievance, into activity, into action. In a time when she was dying and she was aware that her life would be cut very, very short, that is when she stepped up her activism. That is when she went to more protests. That's when she, for the first time, stood on the stage and talked to thousands of people, at the Women's March. This is the door that loss can be. This is the gate that loss can be, a gate to greater love for a larger set of people, a gate to greater understanding about what justice looks like and what it means. And that even as we are on that precipice, of dying, there's this opportunity. Yeah, there's this opportunity to fight. And so I started there for that reason, to remind each of us that loss isn't only a point of sorrow. It's also a landscape for liberation, Ashe. It's also a landscape for liberation. And Pablo Neruda, the poet, wrote, "I know the earth and I am sad," And then Arthur Gargi, I don't know how to say the last name, Bhattacharya, who I love the book that he wrote about racial capitalism, and I encourage you all to get it. I'll drop a link in there later. But he wrote in his book about racial capitalism, at the heartbreak rather, is at the heart of all revolutionary consciousness. Now, when I take those two ideas together, Pablo Neruda said, "I know the earth and I'm sad." Basically, I know the troubles of the world. I understand the challenges and the trials of the planet. And then this author says, yes, but heartbreak is at the heart of all revolutionary consciousness, meaning that in this context of unequal power, when losses are created, they are mechanized, they're necessary, meaning they're gonna happen under these conditions. And they're not just gonna happen like natural losses, they're unnatural losses. They're gonna happen disproportionately to some people and less to other people. And then when those losses occur, the people who are disproportionately facing loss, they are also then disproportionately unable to grieve, disallowed from grieving. Think about the enslaved, those who lost so much through the institution of chattel slavery. Think about those who are forced to migrate, forced to leave their lands, forced to lose their language. Think about those who are the victims of genocide. We've lived through a genocide, actually, already. We live on the top of the bones of a genocide. And so this is the place we begin, first, to acknowledge that heartbreak is at the heart of all revolutionary consciousness, which means we have to begin by acknowledging the heartbreak. Y'all know what I'm talking about. We have to start there. And so I want to start there. I want to start there because part of what happens when our hearts are broken, particularly when there are forces that seem so outside of our control, like they do right now, when we are watching on social media, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people murdered. Even before that, we watched Black children and Black people killed by the police over and over again. And it felt like there was nothing we could do. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people all around the world stepped out into the street to protest. And still. So this place that we find ourselves, where we are facing extraordinary losses, simultaneous, it's unprecedented, am I right? It's not that the world hasn't experienced mass loss before, but all at the same time, mass losses from climate disaster, repeated losses from police violence, the mass losses of colonial wars in multiple locations, the mass losses of gun violence, all back to back to back. We ain't never seen nothing like this before. And it's only going to escalate. And I don't say that because it's meant to be depressing. That's not the point. The point is we have to turn and face it. What happens with loss, the first thing that happens is shock. We're shocked, we're surprised. There's a dissonance that occurs. And in that dissonance, we sometimes can move to denial. Now, what happens if you live in a society where the entire national identity is built on denial? And we already know that denial is, in fact, a natural response. There's a dissonance, right, that happens when something or someone very important to you, very close, very meaningful in your life leaves or changes. But when the whole national structure is actually built on denial, meaning this is a nation that bans books. This is a nation that lifts monuments to generals that murdered thousands and thousands and thousands of Native people. This is a nation that doesn't like to tell the whole truth, right? And so under those conditions, grief cannot do its job. Under those conditions, grief cannot do its job. The job of grief, the evolutionary purpose of grief is to adapt, is to help us adapt to change. That's why it exists, right? Like emotions, like we'd be like, I love that person, I love that person. And we do, I believe there's a spiritual element to love, but also there's some biological stuff like about food and needing social connection and, belonging. And so I'm saying that grief has an adaptive function, and that adaptive function is to help us deal with change. So if you live in a society that refuses change, if you live in a society that destroys memory, if you live in a society that lies and, then grief cannot do its job. And the thing about grief is that it has an impact on the body and it has an impact on the brain, right? The brain can't pay attention to everything. I wish it could. I would be multitasking right now. I got so much to do. But the brain cannot pay attention to everything. It can't. What happens in the period of acute loss is that we have to prioritize in order to survive. Yeah. In that time, we narrow our focus. And sometimes I remember after Alana died, and also after my mom died, sometimes it felt like I was just above water. You know that feeling? Have you been there? When the water's like right here and you're just trying to tilt your head back so you can keep breathing. And there's maybe a ceiling right here. And you just got a little bit of air. So you just kind of start to conserve your oxygen. You breathe more slowly. I know some of you have been in that place. I've been in that place. And in that place, I can't think about all the other things. All I can think about is breathing. Yeah. That's how it is for many people of color in this country who suffer loss after loss after loss, who then do not have the mechanisms to participate to allow grief to do its job. And so we adapt. Yeah, we adapt. Poor people, we adapt. Trans and queer people, we adapt. We focus on survival. This is not how any of us wants to live. Am I right? We don't want to only focus on survival. In order for us to be able to focus more fully, to live more fully, to live more freely, we have to fight for a world that allows grief to do its job. And so the first thing I want to do together, if that's okay, is I want to begin with a embodiment practice. If we can begin with some centering, some visualizing and centering. Now, if you are able to and you want to, you can stand up. You don't have to, but I'm going to. Let me see. Am I really going to? I am. Okay. Feel free to remain seated if that's what works for you. The goal here is to find some solid ground. And we're not talking about the solid ground of the earth, although we want to connect to that. We're talking now about the solid ground that's inside of you. Solid ground that's inside of you. Because what we know about grief, about loss, is that before you can truly face it, you have to feel it. Before you can face it, you have to feel it. And so I invite you to soften your gaze. Let your jaw just relax. Begin to notice your breath. You don't have to change anything. You're just becoming aware of yourself. And as you sit in this awareness, as you stand, be in this awareness, I want to invite you to place one hand on your belly button or so, another hand on your heart. And I invite you to call to mind now someone that you lost, something that you lost, you personally. It can be an important job. It has to be a significant loss, something that was meaningful to you. Your family home, your mama, your daddy, your spouse, the language of your ancestors, some sense of who you might have been, if only, if only, if only somewhere in history, ancestors of yours had not been kidnapped. If only they had not been driven from the lands, if only. Call to mind, to heart, your child, the one you lost. Call to mind your cousin, your auntie, your community, the streets you used to live on. And notice, where is there heat in your body? What is the temperature like on your skin? Does your breath quicken? Are you swaying and rocking? And in this place where you may be activated right now, you may be triggered, you may be heartbroken. In this place, we open to the heartbreak of the world. In this place, connect to the heartbreak of others. And we begin to feel our shape in this place. This place where heartbreak may have made you feel crouched, may have bent your back over. Now, we begin to align our crown with the sky. You feel it? Your head aligned with the heavens. Your head aligned with the clouds. And that line goes straight through you, down, 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 deep into the earth. This place where we notice and move into our length. Do you feel your heartbreak opening? This is our dignity, where we stand. This is the reason we can fight where we stand, where we are. And to your left and to your right, we begin to spread out. And our heartbreak touches everyone on this call. Our heartbreak is shared. Every single one of our dead, every single person dead in Palestine, Israel, every person dead through the conflict in the Congo, Sudan, through all the colonial wars that we are witnessing today. The wars on the bodies of children. Feel as our heartbreak connects with the heartbreak of mothers in every single one of these countries. This width, this is our belonging. Grief is doing its job. And to our back, our ancestors, our history. Do you feel how even if you fell back right now, history would catch you? And to the front, as you lean forward, searching, knowing that anything is possible, the future is unknown. Time holds us in its loving embrace. This is our depth. In our dignity, in our belonging, and in our depth and time, we recognize there is a kind of safety knowing that everyone has been born and everyone will die. And from this place, I invite you to consider, what are you committed to in this time of loss and longing? As your heart breaks open, what also is breaking open in you? What new purpose is coming to bear in your life? We'll take 3 breaths. Invite you back, opening our eyes and returning to the group, sitting as you are able and willing. I want to open up the conversation now to hear from you. I want to know what's come up for you in this time. As we talk about all of what we're witnessing in the world right now, and how that might combine with our own losses, personal losses. What's coming up for you? What came up for you during our centering and meditation? Yeah, let's unspotlight me and let's get in here so we can be with everybody. Okay. I see you, Patricia. What you talking about? What you feeling? You smiling, you know I'm talking to you. What you talking about?
I don't have many words right now, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Right on. Sometimes there are no words, right? That's real. Let's see. So Norma is fighting the urge to go numb. I get it. I get it.
I want to thank you for the opportunity. What came up for me is I was able to focus in on, we had 5 deaths since December 26th, and they all started to kind of run together, and I was able to focus on each one of my family members and kind of hold them with some light around them. And I'm not talking about like bright light, but I'm talking about focus and not like press it down.
Yes.
And there's some sadness coming, but there was some relief just to be able to see them clearly.
That's right.
Rather than being completely overwhelmed with them and all that is going
For sure. Would you mind saying their names?
on. Last person who died is Carol, died on Monday. Then my cousin Keith died about 3 weeks ago now. A week after his sister Evelyn died. Then their nephew David died a couple of weeks before that, and then my aunt Ruth died on December 26th.
Mm.
I wanted to say that this is not normal. This is not okay. And this is happening to us in a way that I'm glad that you are here doing this work. And I just want to keep joining you in the work that I do. This shit's not normal. I'm sorry.
It's not normal. It's not normal and it's not okay. And it is inevitable in a nation such as this, in a world such as this. This is the horrible part of it, right? Just the horrible reality is that the change that would be necessary to stop this onslaught of loss is something that can only be achieved if we can turn and face the losses in ways we never have before. We'd have to be able to tell the truth. We'd have to be able to tell the truth. So these are commitments that we can make. I mean, there's a poet, her name is Denise, I don't know what her last name is, but she wrote, "To speak of sorrow works upon it. To speak of sorrow works upon it. Moves it from its crouched place, barring the way to and from the soul's hall. To speak of sorrow works upon it." We have to speak it. We have to tell the truth. And so I'm inviting you now, speak your sorrow. Anika, how you say your name, family?
Anika.
Anika.
I was gonna say is that just the need for us to slow down. And that is exactly what your exercise did. It makes us slow down and have to grieve. As a gentleman just stated, when you have losses upon losses, and sometimes they're not even our own losses, those close to us, and you feel like you want to take the pain away, but you can't. It's those collective losses as well. And just needing that healing. And it seems like so many people are isolated, not even just from their families in the same cities, even those they call family are not necessarily family. So even healing those losses and just being able to say, look, I need help, whether you meditate, whether you pray, anything, it doesn't mean that you still don't need some physical help, even a hug, a simple smile, just something just to keep you from losing it, because we're all going and experiencing some type of loss. But I am seeing a lot of people, and I was like him, I lost like 5 or 6 people at one time. And it's like, do you ever get to breathe? And then it's like, you're always caring for others. Who's caring for you? That's why I took the time where I'm not only a birth doula, but I took the time to become a death doula, because not only should we not birth alone, but we shouldn't have to pass on alone either.
Well, Shay, thank you for your work. Thank you for your work. We need that. We need that in this time. People to accompany us. Let's talk a moment about grief. We say that a lot. I hear that a lot. I don't know how to grieve, or we're not able to grieve. We're not grieving. So let's talk for a moment about what that is, if that's all right. I'm gonna go back to this little slides. I don't love slides in as we talk about loss, you know, but I'm gonna use them for a second. I'm gonna get rid of them, if that's all right with y'all. Let's see here, because I got to keep going back and forth. I'm not a technological expert. Let's see. See, I have no idea what I'm doing. We got to find it again. All right, I'll come back to that. For now, the thing I wanted to talk with you all about is about what grief is. Yeah. And grief, you know, we talk about grief as often we talk about it as the acute pain that follows a loss, the suffering aspect, right, of our reaction to loss. But I want to challenge that. I want to push back on that idea. You know, I want to suggest that grief actually is the range, the full range of emotional, cognitive, functional, and behavioral responses to loss. You feel me? All of that. And I'm going to add something to that, the social and structural responses to loss. This is a grieving nation. This nation is a nation that is poised at the intersection of constantly inducing loss, and at the same time, rejecting and refusing to acknowledge loss. Am I right? That's where we live. That's the intersection that we live at, right? We live in a nation that is built on slave labor, is built on the labor of poorly paid migrants, is built on child labor. This is the nation that we live in, right? And also, they don't want to talk about none of that. So we have to, I think it's important for us to expand our understanding of grief, to acknowledge that we're actually always grieving. In fact, grieving isn't an experience, it isn't an emotion, it's a way of living. It's a process that we are always in. Does that make sense? It's a process that we're always in, right? It's not simply anguish, it's not simply sorrow, and it's not simply distress. You just watched a video that my wife made. Didn't you laugh? I did. Because she's funny. And that is one face of grief, right? Joy, we love. We wouldn't have grief if we didn't love. And so joy is a central part of our understanding of how we grieve, right? And so we're going to expand. We're going to begin redefining grief here. And in that same place, I want to think about this question of what is collective grief? Yeah. So we have our personal grief, the grief that we experience one-on-one, and then we have this collective grief, this grief that we experience together. I want to take a moment, and the way I define collective grief is that collective grief occurs when a community, a society, a village, or a nation all experience extreme change or loss. Hello? That's what's going on right now. We are in an unprecedented period of collective grief. And so the only antidote, the only way to deal with, not antidote, the only way to deal with and be in the process of collective grief and let collective grief do its job is to build and participate in social movements. That is my philosophy. When you suffer collective loss, and then you engage, then you are, or when collective loss occurs, and then you suffer communal sorrow, right? We're together, we're sad together. But you don't have any means by which to stop it. You don't have any means by which to decline the losses, you know. You can't hold anyone responsible. You know, it's not possible to make any change. Then you begin to be in a very painful and difficult situation. Yeah. What happens is something about how we are and how we live gets very distorted. But when you're able to join with other people that have that shared experience of loss, when you're able to be in organizations that can collectivize and where you can build with other folks, think about the organic institutions that have been built after mass shootings. These are led by parents, often, right? Parents whose children were killed at a school shooting. Or the mothers against drunk driving, whose children were killed in drunk driving incidents. These organic institutions pop up because these individuals, the bereaved, say, hey, I know I'm not the only one. And part of my healing is through action. You feel me? That's part of the process by which we reintegrate, by which we're able to embody and transform the grieving process or engage in the grieving process. I don't know if this makes sense to you, because for some people, they think that grief is a mental health issue, purely. What you need is to go to therapy, get you some healing, you're going to be fine, They think of grief as a time-bound process. It should only last no longer than 1 year, right? That's what the DSM says. Grief, healthy grief, should end after 1 year. But how long did the pandemic take place? And how long will the wars take place? And how long will the water shortages be? And how long will the displacement happen? How long? Besides which, that we know that scientifically, grief does not end after a particular period of time. It really depends on your relationship and on the specifics of the loss. And so what we know is that when collective losses happen, when communal losses happen, mass losses, collective grief requires infrastructure, it requires institutions, it needs process, it needs material things. It's not just something that you can go take care of by yourself. We have to do it together. We have to do it together. So I'm going to pause there. I want to pause there for a minute and just invite responses. I really want to know, is this way of thinking about grief, does it resonate with you? Does it sound wrong? Like, how does it strike you? I'm curious.
I can say something, Malkia. My name's Lori. So I had like 5 losses around the same time as well. With my best friend, aunt, uncle, my mother, and then a year after my mom, my dad. I took care of my dad to the end. I didn't have time to grieve my mom because I was taking care of my dad, and they were married for 53 years. And he got suicidal after she died. They both got cancer. And so, society, family, friends acted like it was no big deal, just like shake it off, like move forward. And I agree. I just think that we need to talk about it more. Education is so important because it isn't something that's the same for everyone. It isn't something where you could put a time period. The DSM like should have just ... not a year.
Agreed, 100%. What do other folks feel? Is it resonating with you? Does it make sense? What you talking about, Amber? We can't hear you. You're not on mute.
You're not on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, hi. So deeply the resonation. My grandfather just died on Monday, then I was with him. And I just have his picture. I don't know if you can see. I can't see a video of myself, but this was him when he was in the Air Force. Just a beautiful man. And I've had the compounded grief of my mother ending her life, and then my grandma, my stepdad, and my stepgrandma all got cancer, and they've all passed within the year. And my great grandmother and my fur family and my friends, it's just been just like overwhelming, especially at my age, to be the, you know. And so I became a deaf midwife as well. And I really love this Greek activism piece of that we have to find meaning. And so I created a grief ceremony every month so that people can come together and counsel and breath work and speak on it and then move it out, you know? And it's like, we have to create the spaces because they're not here for us. So I've just felt like I literally have, I'm just gonna make those little memes of this whole, of your words. Like you're gonna see them online because everything that you said is just so deep and so true. And it's because of your experience. I always say I like to feel the experience of people, not the books. Like I want that lived experience. So thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you to everyone that's here, and so much resonance around just so much compounded grief.
Thank you. Thank you. When I saw the young non-binary person who was killed, who let me say this, who died, and whose conditions I believe were murderous. Yes. Young Native American next. And I thought about, you know, the fact that there are some people who, because of who that child is, because of the fact that they're non-binary, because of the fact that they're Native American, would not feel like their life mattered at all, right? Would not feel like it was relevant that they were bullied to death. Yeah. I think about that in the context of all of what we're seeing internationally, that there is any ability for us to separate ourselves from the thousands that are dying right now, that there's any way for us to believe that any of these lives are ungrievable lives, that any of these children deserve to die, or any of these people deserve death. And part of what happens when you destroy the system of journalism, or when you make it so that there's no local, news, or when you ban books, you destroy the educational system, you also destroy empathy. Yeah. Like you destroy people's ability to find life grievable, the lives of various people grievable. It's a war tactic. It happens in almost every war, that one of the first things that the aggressor, the aggressor does is that they destroy the communications infrastructure. One of the reasons they're doing that is so that you can't collectivize your suffering, your pain, so that you can't feel together the empathy that's required to make that stop, right? So empathy and the generating of empathy is a function of grief, a positive function of grief that systemically is destroyed under inequality. Are y'all feeling what I'm saying? Right there, this is something. So when we grieve, and I'm saying this to you because we are taught that we should, that we want grief to end, right? We are taught that grief is painful and destructive, and we want it to be over. because nothing wants to suffer, right? Nothing wants to suffer. But I want to suggest that grief is not only that. In fact, it's not grief that's painful, it's loss. Loss is painful. Grief is itself the healing. You don't need to be healed from grief. Grief is the healing. It is a process by which the body, mind, and spirit heals following a loss. That is what grief is. It's an integrative process. And integration isn't possible when you don't have the mechanisms and the tools and the conditions for integration. So the thing I'll say here is just that grief requires infrastructure, right? So grief is itself the healing. Grief requires infrastructure. We have to build the infrastructure. And when you have it, what is returned to us is humanity. What's returned to us is our humanity. And so when we fight for the right and power to grieve, when we fight for hospice, when we fight for the return of bodies, you've seen debates about the return of bodies. All of this stuff is about basic humanity. It's about humanity. Grieving is a humanizing process. I'm gonna move toward some closure. Yeah, we have about maybe 20 minutes or so left. And I wanna offer a little bit more information. And then I wanna give us a chance to have a little bit more conversation. So let's see here. So one of the things that is important is that if we understand that grief is a healing, yeah, and we understand that grief is adaptive, it has an adaptive function. In the context of a power imbalance, in a nation that's 100% built on inequality. And I'm saying things that some people might be like, it's not 100% built on inequality. But I'm Black, and I can assure you it certainly is. And so this knowledge, right, that we have when you are from an oppressed community, whatever that oppressed community is, whether it's a community of women, a community of trans people, a community of children, right? People whose power is taken from them and who are controlled by the systems and by the status quo. That under those conditions, these conditions of inequality, grief takes on many faces. There are many different types of losses that are created, right? Loss then manifests in all kinds of different ways. There's somebody named Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci. He was a theorist he's an Italian theorist. I think it's 18th century theorist. And he talks about morbid symptoms. Yeah. He talks about the kind of morbid symptoms that arise when you're in something called an interregnum. This is a period. The interregnum is a period of instability, a period of chaos, a period where you don't know what's going to happen. It's a period between stable governments. Anybody know what I'm talking about, right? Don't it feel like that's what's going on right now? We're in a period of instability. We don't know what's going to happen. It's terrifying. And in that period, he talks about morbid symptoms arising. These morbid symptoms can be anything from, like a pandemic, right? It's a morbid symptom. The collapse of particular parts of the economy. A collapse of infrastructure, planes, planes that aren't working very well anymore, right? All of this stuff, these are signs that an economic and social order is struggling, morbid symptoms. And in that context, guess what else emerges? and is a morbid symptom. It's fascism, authoritarianism. Authoritarianism feeds on mass loss events. It feeds on chaos. It works through chaos. And so I believe, now you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I believe that the antidote to authoritarianism is a transformative grief. Transformative grieving is the antidote to authoritarianism. Some of the ways that loss shows itself: anticipatory grief, or grief shows itself: anticipatory grief, ambiguous grief. I call this my grief ABCs. Anticipatory and ambiguous. We are constantly anticipating loss. There are whole communities who live like this. I grew up in a community like this, in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn in the 80s. Gay men, Black women who were using IV drugs, whole families grew up in the 80s in the context of HIV/AIDS with anticipatory grief, terrified. Who's going to die next? We felt that during the pandemic. What's going to happen? Who's going to die next? Then you have this ambiguous grief, the grief of many migrants, migratory grief, ambiguous grief. It's not the same, but it's similar, right? Ambiguous grief is when you lose someone, but you don't know how, you don't know why. What happened? In many dictatorships, under, when there's been a coup, all over the world, this is true. And people die, and or they disappear. They are disappeared. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people that have been disappeared by their government, and their loss is ambiguous. We don't know what happened. People who die in prison, ambiguous. We don't know how. We don't know why. We often can't get the kind of information we need and deserve. They call some of this other stuff complicated, compounded grief. This is where we have so many different losses. You said it earlier, brother. You said it earlier, sister. We can't even, it run together. Complicated and compounded. It becomes elemental to the experience of living. It becomes characteristic of a particular experience. In my case, it's characteristic of a Black experience. You have grief that is criminalized, suffocated. Pauline Boss is a researcher who's done a lot of looking at this question of criminalized grief or smothered or suffocated grief. It's not the same as disenfranchised, where you just like ignore it. This is where you are forced to pay. Anybody got an example of criminalized grief? Let me give you one. How about all the protesters? How about the protesters at Cop City in Atlanta? How about all the protesters protesting for a ceasefire right now? What about all the protesters, the Black Lives Matter protesters, and all the water protectors, all the protesters who go to prison and go to jail and who are criminalized because they are mourning in public? They're mourning in public. Criminalization of protest is an act of criminalizing grief. And then, of course, disenfranchised grief, where essentially your grief is considered irrelevant. It does not matter. It does not exist. For all of the losses amongst enslaved Africans in this country, whether or not you could have a funeral was determined by white power, right? Where the funeral could be, when it was going to be, and whether it could be. This is disenfranchised grief. Your grief is not relevant.
Malkia, is that the same thing as also not only being criminalized or disenfranchised, it's the fact of not also having the resources?
Absolutely.
grieving, and it depends on the area where you're at, whether you're in the inner city or the suburbs. You know, you know, give you an example of when school shootings were happening or different things were happening in suburbs. You had drones of social workers, et cetera, different agencies come in, but in the inner city, and it's, you know, the traumas, they're just different cultures, different people deal with their traumas and the different griefs differently. But you'll see where they're like, oh, wake up in class, do this, and you're like, well, who's going to help me? I'm seeing all these other schools closing or things happening. You're seeing these reasons, but then kids are having to just, I put in the chat, adulterize, where they've got to deal with like adult issues as youth and don't know what to do with those emotions, especially with puberty. They have no idea, and they explode. And people wonder why they're exploding and what's going on. That's why suicide rates are on the rise, because they don't know where to put these emotions.
I think you're absolutely 100% correct. And we've seen evidence of this very obviously in Butte County. Out here in Butte County, there were two schools. One school that was really affected by the Paradise fires, you know, and then another school that was really affected by the pandemic. Now, the school that was really affected by the Paradise fires was a mostly white school. The school that was affected by the pandemic was mostly Latino and Black. Now, the Paradise fires received a lot of federal support, right? They got support from the federal government and from the state to rebuild. You know, their families got support in various ways. The children who lost their parents, who became orphaned, and more children of color became orphaned by the pandemic than any group. So, and Black children in particular became orphaned by the pandemic. These children did not get any real support. They did not get any federal aid. They did not get, and their schools did not get any federal support. They did not get any aid. And so we see that the disenfranchisement of grief is institutional, right? It isn't just an individual don't care about how you feel. You know what I mean? Like it's absolutely where resources are placed or where they are not placed. That demonstrates whether you believe life is grievable or you don't, or you believe grief is reasonable or it isn't. So absolutely, 100%. Thank you for bringing that up. We have this migratory grief, the grief of losing your land, being forced off your land, dispossessed, whether it's Black folk in Tulsa or it's people in El Salvador, you know, being forced to leave where you love because of a colonial extraction. Yes, because somebody want what's on your land. Bottom line, they want it, they finna take it, and you got to go. And we already talked about collective grief, and finally, traumatic grief, traumatic loss. And I'll end this part here to say that all loss is not traumatic. Loss is natural. Everything will be lost. Every single one of us here is going to die. In fact, everything we love, we will lose at some point. I lost the love of my life. She wasn't just my wife, she was my soulmate. I will never have another that is quite like her. I will never, not ever, not ever. My mother, my best friend, my cousins, my auntie, my uncle, my friends, my childhood girlfriend. I could go on and on and on and on. I have dozens and dozens and dozens of losses. But they're traumatic because they were unnecessary. They're traumatic because they came as the result of inequality. They're traumatic because I was not allowed to respond to those losses in a healthful way. Did not have the resources, did not have the permission, did not have the time. This is what makes loss traumatic, right? Is the fact that is the violence associated. It's the fact that we die younger, more frequently, and you know, and this is what makes it traumatic. I just want to be clear: loss is natural. Loss is natural. And grief is a natural, healthful tool to adapt to change. That's all loss is change. So we don't want to stop loss. We're not out here trying to prevent loss, natural loss. We're trying to prevent the unnatural loss that is the direct result of exploitation, extraction, extermination. This is what we're trying to prevent. I want to, we're going to end here. And I want to invite just some closing reflections from you. You know, this is a scholar, Tasha Border. She's a Black woman. I love her. I love everything she'd be writing about. I think you should look her up, you know. But she responded to this DSM issue when they said that, oh, grief, that's prolonged grief. We're gonna put that on the DSM. And so now you gotta, you can go to your insurance and get therapy past a year, right? That was the reason for it. But it served to pathologize those people who, like myself, who aren't grieving is my life. Like you know, you turn around, you lose someone. You know, it's not something that's going to end, you know, yesterday. So I love this quote that she has, right? Grief will always be prolonged as long as just injustice is prolonged. Grief will always be prolonged as long as injustice is prolonged. This is where I want to close this particular set of comments. And I want to give you a chance to just react and reflect, either share in the chat, but also feel free to share out loud. You know, let's use our voice, because this is how we heal the sorrow. This is how we allow the sorrow to break us open to the heartbreak of the world so that we can be in a transformative process. We speak to it. We speak to it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that share and come on back here. Tell me a little bit about where you're at. And I'm going to ask you, Brooks, I see your face. What you thinking about?
Oh, well, thank you so much for everything you've offered tonight and everyone who shared. I resonate very much with the definition of grief that you offered. And what I was thinking about in that moment that you saw my face was how much suicidality is a part of my life as a queer person and the people that I love, and how many times I've been worried about losing my sibling. And I haven't lost them yet, but I've just taken that in and having, you know, an opportunity to even take in that as anticipatory grief. I think been really in the collective grief and just had a moment to connect it to the personal. So thank you.
Thank you for your heart. What's on your mind, Rhoda?
When you asked a while ago for us to find something that was a significant loss, I went through a number of like concrete losses, like my house and a job and things like that. And that wasn't it. And I finally landed on, you know, even in childhood, it was the feeling of being alone and on my own with nobody caring. And my heart goes to the times we or people feel like nobody notices or acknowledges that they matter. And like, I put a song from Emmylou Harris, and it has to do with lost into this world, and it includes like being killed out on the plains, you know, and the blood like growing into the sand. And So that's what's on my mind, is just how intimately each of us is connected to all of us.
Ashe. Facts. Thank you for that. What you talking about, Susan?
Thank you. Well, I just want to say, for one thing, is I'm honored to be part of the sisters here who are made the list of the death doula, death midwives. I'm also one. I've been a nurse for 25 years, hospice 11 of those years. And what I got early on in my career is how disconnected we are from the sacredness of our final rites of passage. And when you spoke about the criminality, the criminalized grief, and how, our white supremacist patriarchy is still in full control, I think of all the homicides. I'm here in Oakland, California, where, gun violence seems to be on the rise again. I think about how, instead of honoring the final rite of passage of any young, beautiful human being that's been shot down, it becomes a crime scene. And all those who are left to grieve, they're screwed. I mean, they've lost the beauty, that beautiful human being. And not only that, but I think about 35% of homicides are even ever solved, so there's no closure when it comes to these homicides. There's no possibility for them to participate in something of beauty, to honor that final rite of passage. And to me, that's part of the social movement that you're talking about. And I think that's what the death doula, death midwife movement's about, but also just a lot of us are also just trying to figure out in some simple and non-threatening ways how we can reconnect with that sacredness, because we can't thrive if we're so disconnected. And I'm so grateful for everything you said tonight, and I look forward to listening to this all again. It's touched a lot for me, so thank you.
I just want to say thank you. You all are incredibly beautiful. Speaking of being sacred, speaking of connecting in with the sacred, this is a sacred space. The space where we get to be honest, the space where we get to be real, and the space where we get to transform all of this into something that has meaning and that can change the trajectory of this nation and of this world. I look forward to being able to do that with each one of you. My name is Malkia Devich Cyril. You can find me on different, social medias. I'm Culture Jedi. I always use that everywhere I go. We have to be there for each other, family. We do. And especially on this grief. I'm in Oakland, but I'm also everywhere. I'm also in Brooklyn. My whole family's in Brooklyn. I travel all over. So let me know where you at so I can come visit, and we can build, and we can sit, and we can do whatever it is you do to be sacred. So that's where I'm at. Okay.
Malkia,
thank you.
I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us at Reimagine and this community that you created tonight. You said you're not a tech expert, but I can say for sure you have profound expertise in grief. I am just so overwhelmed and impressed and so grateful that you have taken the time to be with us and to share all your knowledge. Can we just give a little love to Malkia, please? Thank you. I'm going to paste in the chat a few links because folks were asking about continuing this conversation, and we can do that next Wednesday. We have the third and final session of our series, The Pursuit of Justice, and there will be opportunities for breakout sessions, which we didn't have tonight. We're going to have 2 additional visionaries in justice and in transformation, particularly in the field of healthcare. We have Dr. Nahid Dosani and Michael Light, who have been providing palliative care to homeless populations, one in Toronto, the other in Seattle. And we're going to discuss steps for everyone to address inequality and shift mindsets with compassion, service, and justice. So please join us for that. Want Once again, Malkia, thank you. And I wish everyone a restful evening and hope to see you next Wednesday.